Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Nicci Cloke. Nicci is the author of 8 novels, including 2 under the pseudonym Phoebe Locke. Her books have been published in 12 languages. She lives in Cambridgeshire countryside after a decade spent in London, and previously worked as a nanny, a cocktail waitress, and a Christmas elf to support her writing. Before being published, she worked as a permissions manager, looking after literary estates, including those of Sylvia Plath, Ted Hughes, and T.S. Eliot, and was also communications manager at the Faber Academy. Welcome, Nicci.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We were just having this is Nicci's U.S. debut, so we get to have her in the U.S. for the very first time. It's a beautiful cover. If you're not watching us but listening, go check out her many faces. And so before we dig into all the fun things about this book, Nicci, tell us a little bit about Her Many Faces.
Okay, Her Many Faces is the story of Katie, who is a waitress on trial for poisoning 4 very powerful, influential members of the private club in London where she works. But it's told from the perspective of the 5 men who think they know her best. So her dad, her childhood best friend, her lover, or well, her ex-lover, he'll be very clear on that point, her lawyer, and a journalist who's writing about the case. And they've all got a very different idea about who she is and whether she might have done it or not.
So we were talking just before we started recording about, the idea of sort of the woman seen through these 5 men, which of course is so. Is this purposeful? Was that your sort of? Did you start the story thinking I wanted? Because that's how that's how society works, right? Oftentimes it's the male voices that tell us about women.
Sure, yeah, exactly. I think it was a combination of things. I think I wanted to look at a character's story through the people around her, and specifically what kind of spurred that on was thinking about names and nicknames that I've had in my life and how some of those nicknames from childhood or from family or from ex-partners feel like past selves. They don't really feel like me. They're kind of roles, I guess, that I've played at various parts of my life. So I kind of wanted to look at that. And I guess at the same time, it being a crime novel, I was thinking about cases. So when I was writing this, the Lucy Letby trial was going on in the UK. And I think it's very interesting how we need to label women
Mm.
who are on trial more than we probably do men. And we need to understand them more. We need to, Lucy Letby, so many of the headlines focused on the part that she was kind of like this blonde, sunny looking girl who came from like a loving family. Her parents were in court every day, and she's accused of these terrible crimes. And I don't necessarily know that we care that much about male murderers and their, family status. So that kind of played into choosing those male voices to look at this story.
And when you, I don't know, in your process, are you somebody who sort of has them mapped out, or is it happen more organically? There's always the question of, the sort of in broadest terms, pantser versus plotter. But how did the story develop for you? Is it
I
planned?
mean, this one was a tricky one because before I wrote this, I had 5 years between books, and part of that was like I had this massive, complete, I don't know, overnight disappearing of my confidence, I think.
Yeah.
I just spent, I don't know if it's maybe quite a common thing during lockdown with other writers struggling to find inspiration, but after my 7th novel, I started and abandoned 12 separate stories because
Oh,
all of them
wow.
I just think the previous 2 books had been well reviewed, but they didn't sell that well. And I, for various reasons, I guess, but I think I really felt the pressure that the new book had to be something special to kind of come back from that and, you know, to regain some kind of confidence in my work. And I just couldn't work out what it was, what story I needed to tell and what I was trying, my own tastes had changed a lot. And I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with the next book. And then this story kind of came along, and I guess it was like I had to rediscover my process because I'd messed around with it so much over those 12 books. And I guess because this book is told through those 5 different voices, it's quite complicated anyway to try and
Yeah.
piece together 5 stories. And I think the first phase of that for me was working out Katie is someone different to all five of those men, and I
Yes,
needed to work out who she was to each of them more than who she actually is. Work
right.
out what each of them was trying to say about her and how to piece that together so that you're getting the story of the trial and the crime she's supposed to have committed, as well as her backstory.
Mhm.
So it was a mess, basically, process of drafting, and I ended up working on each voice separately for a while. So I'd
Mhm.
kind of take the draft apart, edit John is her dad, edit his voice first, and then do each of the other men, and then try and slot it back together like a puzzle piece, like
Yeah, I
each.
mean
Yeah,
and they have very distinct voices. I mean, you have the little, like you said, the nicknames. Each chapter sort of has, we hear who it's from by the nickname, like your dad calls her Kit Kat, and then the journalist calls her Killer Kate, of course,
yeah,
because but you do. I mean, that is interesting because right, they have to be very distinct. And
yeah.
5 points of view is quite a lot. I don't know if you've done that before, but
I
and then
won't be
of
doing it
course.
again.
Yeah, no spoilers, but they're at the very, very end. There's a final fabulous chapter that we talked about a little bit before we started recording as well that I just absolutely adore. So you did have to sort of create, and then there's the presence also of her, she has two brothers, right? And they also feel like they have separate voices, even though we're not in their points of view.
Yeah,
She's really surrounded by men. Um,
yeah, yeah, she is. Um, and in very different ways, those relationships were all very different. And yeah, it was trying to, and I think it was a process of discovery as well of who the men are.
mhm.
So through like exploring what they've got to say about her, I was learning about them
Yeah,
more than I was learning about her really, and trying to figure out like why they think the way they do and what they need her to be, as well as their own biases that kind of show her in certain lights. So her dad, for instance, he has a lovely view of her. He thinks that she's really innocent and sweet, and she's his youngest child. But there's so much weight on that and pressure that he puts on her because he needs her to play that role.
right.
They've gone through a lot of tragedy as a family, and I
Yes.
think he really needs her to be this kind of light for him in dark times. And I think that really is difficult for her. It's
Yeah.
this kind of a suffocating sort of love, really. So even though he's a positive viewpoint in the novel compared to some of the others, it has its own negatives for her.
Right. I mean, and this process, the crime and her being accused and going, on trial has really also had a huge impact on his marriage, like on on her parents. So there
Yeah.
is quite a bit of pressure on her, right? I mean, because she can draw a straight line from this trial to sort of what's happened to her parents' relationship and her mother. I kind of like the juxtaposition. We're so used to the sort of cliche of the mother being the sort of loving, supportive to the ends of the earth ones, and the dads being more distanced. And in this case, it's reversed. So
Yeah.
really, her support system, as well as sort of the people trying to pull her down, are all really men. They are all men. So
Yeah.
I think that's, and yeah, I think that's really incredibly powerful. So okay, so when you first so you don't you sort of talked about you had a plan sort of for the who the points of view would be and sort of
Yeah.
how we would, and did you know sort of where the story would end? I'm always curious about like, so you sort of have you had a pretty good sense.
Yeah, I mean, I knew whether she'd done it or not, which I guess is the most important thing.
Yes.
Things did change in the drafts, so I did experiment with different ways in which the crime could have unfolded, and I did experiment with putting in a sixth man. So at one point, one of the bartenders at the club was another viewpoint, to try and give you that bit of extra perspective into what had happened that night. But it was too many; it just felt too many, and he hadn't known her for very long, so I don't think he had that much to add in
Yeah.
terms of our understanding of her. So I cut him. So that was a lot of the process, was adding and removing things, but the actual story itself, her backstory was all quite planned and important, like to have that in my head as I was going in.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, so I'm curious because it's like you said, it's so many points of view. And so when you're And I'm also curious because, as you said, you had 12 sort of false starts, which is a lot of false starts. I mean, I think when you get to three or four, you're like, okay, this feels like bad luck. But when you get to 10 and 11 and 12, you must have really felt. So, what broke you from the sort of that had to have been? I mean, we all have imposter syndrome, I think,
Mm.
at different stages. And I actually just was at Thriller Fest, which is the annual thriller writer conference in New York, which is so amazing, and saw a really dear friend who's had a huge success recently. And she is just struggling to get this new book, and it's late a year, and and it is like it's funny because I'm like, you're at the top of your game, and she's like, I think that's the problem, right? So how why was this one the book that you're like, this is the one that is gonna, or did you just get a little further and a little further until you're like, oh, lucky 13?
I really don't know. I think it was partly the nature of it because they're quite short chapters and they're different voices. I ended up doing a lot of it like on my phone on the train or, in the middle of a conversation with somebody, I'd just be jotting down an idea I'd had. And I don't know if I kind of tricked myself like psychologically into being like, oh, I've actually got quite a lot of story down without too much pressure. Um, so I think it was that. I think I just really believed in it in a way that I hadn't the other ideas. So I guess it's good that the other ideas didn't kind of get completed because I clearly didn't have as much faith in them. Um, and I think it kind of connected with me, this story, because the last two books that I'd written were written under a pseudonym.
Ah,
And I don't know if that was part of the problem. I think that wasn't my idea. It was suggested to me by
yeah,
people in the industry because they were a slightly different genre. And as you and I were just talking about before we started recording, the industry does love a debut. And so publishers are always kind of looking for ways for you to reinvent yourself and get a bit of that pie again. And so it was suggested that I used a pseudonym, but I think that detached me a bit from the work. And I think I felt like I'd lost a bit of my identity. And so much of this story is about Katie and her identity and how it's formed and those names and what they mean to her. So I don't know if it kind of connected with that part of me that was struggling and gave me some kind of validation or some kind of additional strength, I guess,
yeah.
to
There's some
get over that.
parallels between, I mean, your story and Kate's story. I mean, obviously, rough parallels, but in terms of sort of having to prove yourself, and having a lot of eyes on you, right? It
Yeah.
does feel like we have our partner's eyes and and our editor and our agent and, whatever. It's a lot of people saying, s- sort of daring you, can you do it?
Yeah.
Can you pull this off? And I mean, so what would you tell somebody who's, I mean, struggling from imposter syndrome, whether they're on their first, we have a lot of aspiring authors. I always feel like listening to the podcast and, and to hear that somebody who's so successful and established, which is what you are, even though I'm sure in your brain you're like, but I was
Yeah.
doing, it's like, what? No, but yes, you are. To sort of have that crisis of faith, what advice would you give?
I think for me, I had to rediscover the fun of it because I think it's so easy to get so bogged down in worrying about sales or like what's the hook. That's the thing that really got me, I think, in those 12 that I kept like, losing is I kept seeing things or hearing from the industry like what's the elevator pitch? What's the hook? And I think you do need that, but it comes later.
I
You
agree.
I can do that elevator pitch for How Many Faces now, but I didn't have it at the start. It came later, and I think I needed that. For me, the fun is all in finding those voices, getting to know them, figuring out the story, and I'd lost that along the way. And so I think you do have to just find your love for it again, however that may be. And for me, writing on my phone, because I was so feverish with this idea, it wasn't
Yes.
like going to my desk and sitting down and thinking, right, I've got to write today. It was just, oh, like a scene's just come to me, and it had a new energy. And I think if you're struggling, maybe you have to figure out what brought you in the first place to writing and try and
Yeah.
get back to that excitement.
Yeah, because I mean, you certainly aren't here for the like massive income and the and the easy day job part.
Exactly.
It has to be the love of it, right? I mean, the love of story. And I agree. I sort of feel the same about the elevator pitch. I'm still gonna have to work on that before my book comes out in February because I hate those. And I do feel like it's a matter of sort of seeing for me where the story will reach, will be have to be fully developed before I understand what is at its essence. So
Mhm.
I'm not even a planner. And I'm starting a new book and thinking, God, what's at the essence of this? Is it about, you know, it's obviously about a woman, but is it about motherhood? Is it about marriage? Is it about, and it's really, it just takes, discovery time, and you have to have, it's a lot of faith, right? You have to have a lot of faith, that you'll figure it out.
Yeah, and you have to have the joy in it along the way, otherwise, what's the point?
What's the point, right?
Yeah.
You could be a Christmas elf and it would be so much less stressful.
It would not actually. Being an elf is really hard. I would not do that again. Of all the jobs I've had, that was the worst, hands down the worst.
I can kind of imagine that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I mean, yeah. And are you an introvert naturally?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So then it's
definitely.
like really hellish, right?
Yeah, but I think I took it very seriously, my elf duties, and that kind of the writer in me invented lots of backstory. Because the thing is with kids, they have questions. They have a lot of questions. And so if you were the queue elf, which I was some of the time, managing the queue into the grotto, they want to talk to you about like being an elf
Yeah.
and it really like kind of made me call on my powers of creation because I remember one of them saying to me, like, well, what do elves eat? And I said off the top of my head, oh, we eat birthday cake. That's all we eat. And thinking, no, that's a really good answer. And then the child was like, but if you eat birthday cake, then what do you eat on your birthday? And you're like,
Spinach. You're like,
I think I said steak. I think, oh, we eat steak on our birthday. But,
that's so funny. Yeah.
but I just remember one of the times like talking to this slightly older kid, he might have been maybe sort of 7 or 8, and telling, really proud of myself, thinking of all these stories to answer his questions. And then he ran off across there's like a cafe where the grotto was, and he like yelled at the top of his voice, like, Mom, that girl thinks she's a real elf.
You're, you're like, oh boy. Yeah. I mean, right? Because some kids are so precocious and
Yeah.
some are really, so you're talking to the very young ones as well as the sort of, they think they know everything ones. So yeah, that is so funny. Um, so you talked about sort of these 12, having 12 ideas, and I'm curious to know, are you somebody who has, a whole running list of ideas, and how do you determine, which one you're going to work on? And then also, how did you sort of decide, okay, this doesn't have the legs I need for a whole book?
Yeah, I think I have a list on my phone, usually notes of like various half ideas or fragments or characters. And I, with all my novels, I think it is the coming together of several elements. And it's only when the last element clicks into place that you think, oh, okay, this is a story. So like Her Many Faces, I knew I wanted to write about a character from other people's perspectives, but I didn't have exactly what she'd done or who she was, or even whether it was going to be a crime novel at first. Um, and then I guess it was during lockdown and the kind of intervening years here in the UK, or actually I'm in America right now, but back in the UK,
Yeah.
um, there was a lot of talk about kind of class and privilege and the gaps that have been widened by COVID and events. And so that the private members club kind of came from there. And having been a waitress, I was very interested in the kind of things you overhear and see when you're a waitress. So that kind of was another element that clicked in. Um, and there's a conspiracy theory angle that is in the book that came from I had a man come to fix my treadmill uh, just after lockdown, which is why I had the treadmill in the first place. And he was a really nice, normal friendly guy who like came into my garage to fix it, and then in the middle of fixing it just turned around to me and said, oh, because you know that there are 3 men who control the whole world. And I was so wrong-footed, and I was kind of like, are there? And he said, yeah, they faked 9/11, and then it all kind of started from there. And he started telling me this, like all this stuff about how COVID was fake and the war in Ukraine was fake and all of these things. And he was getting really, really angry. And I was suddenly very aware that he was much bigger than me. He was blocking my route to the door.
Mm-hmm.
He'd become quite angry with me personally because I had said that I was vaccinated.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and this came at a time where I was seeing more and more of this on Facebook. Old school friends were kind of like talking about fake news or alternative facts. And someone that I know, a family friend, had told me that Joe Biden was a person in a mask like completely seriously as part of a normal conversation, and it just seemed to be this kind of more and more widespread thing that conspiracy theories are just a normal part of life. So that I did not want to write a whole book about that. It's actually quite a small part of Her Many Faces in a
Yeah.
way, but that's how where that came from. And I think maybe the issue with some of the 12 ideas that were abandoned is that I just don't have that extra element yet, and maybe it will come at some point, but I haven't yet found a way to manufacture that. Like it has to just come. You have to hear something or see something and go, oh, okay, that's what's missing from that story. And without it, it's going to run out of steam before you get to a novel length idea. So
Yeah, so how far did you get? I mean, that's the other question the other thing I was curious about is, you at some point you gave up, but you started 12. So how does that, yeah, how far did you get? Well, what's the furthest you got in the 12?
I finished one of them actually. Well, it's got a few missing chapters, where I don't know if you do this when you're writing, but quite often if I'm struggling, I might just put like a marker and think a chapter's got to go here, but I've got a block on that right now, so I'm just going to carry it on and come back to it. So there's a couple of missing chapters in that idea. And I actually am thinking about trying to develop that for TV maybe, because I think it's a good idea. I think the problem with that one is that it's not the kind of story that I want to write.
Uh-huh.
Think it's quite dark. It's quite a dark crime novel, and I think I'm more interested in psychological suspense in the way How Many Faces is than a straight up kind of serial killer book, which is what that one was. Others, I got to 50,000 words with quite a few of them.
Wow.
Yeah, a few that I just abandoned at 5 or 10,000, and they will never be spoken of again, probably. But I think the ones that got further just are missing, they're missing something, and I mean, maybe some of them I just didn't have the confidence to complete. It just didn't feel like the right time for me. I think maybe the right book comes at the right time, and maybe I was because it was getting, like 6, 7, 8 ideas that I'd abandoned. I don't know if the panic was making me scrabble for things that needed longer to incubate.
Sure.
Maybe,
Well, it
maybe.
seems lovely. The idea of having even a couple in the sort of partially formed or, or even like, as you said, in the incubator, that sounds I am a one idea at a time writer. And I'm always like, this could be it. This could be the very last idea I ever have. So, um, I'm always in awe of people who sort of collect, and maybe I just need to be more thoughtful about the things I encounter that seem interesting and just let them, jot them down in some place to let them, sort of grow and as you said, incubate. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Don't mess with your process. It's working.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. I mean, but right, this isn't this the trick, is that we're always sort of being like, what would work better or what will work next time? And it's never, for the first time ever, I'm starting a book where I do not know how it ends. I've never done that
Okay.
before. And it's
Okay.
horrible. I
What do
feel
you think will
terrible
happen?
about that.
When do you think you'll figure it out?
I mean, I'm 100 pages in, sometime between now and the end. I mean, I roughly know the situation for the characters, but I don't, yeah, I don't. I usually sort of feel like I know that final sort of the final sort of conflict scene or whatever, and that's been just sort of right towards that. And now I don't really know. So yeah, it's very I understand the idea that it makes you feel like an absolute imposter. It's so now obviously you're working on something new, I imagine. And how
Yeah.
is it after that? Like how after her many faces, do you feel renewed confidence? Is it easier?
I think so, yeah. I think it has been easier. I really like this idea that I've been working on. And I think this actually the idea I'm working on was one of the 12 that was abandoned. And I think it was one of the ones that I felt didn't have a strong enough hook to it. And I've realized now that that comes in the writing. So I felt able to kind of carry on with it and find it. Um, and it's been a challenge because it's a different way, moving on from the multi-perspective of How Many Faces. It does follow several different characters, but it's in the third person, so I haven't had to find their voice, which has been an interesting change from How Many Faces. I do know the end of this one, but I've realized in the last couple of days that I probably need something after the end. I
Yeah.
don't, I kind of know where it's going, but because the novel goes back in time, so you follow these characters from the present day backwards to find out what happened to the person who's gone missing. And I feel that I'm realizing as I write it that as the writer, I want to go back to those characters in the present day to see how this has impacted them.
Mhm.
And I imagine I would hope that that's what the reader will feel as well. If you care about the characters that you've been following, you kind of maybe want to see what happens now. So I'm realizing that the end that I thought was the end is in fact not the end.
At the end. I know. I love that. Well, and I love the idea that there's room for things to shift and grow as the story happens. Because I think that's like you said, that's it's you don't really know what the story is going to feel like until and you mentioned the very final scene in Her Many Faces, which we again won't talk about because you have to go read the book, everyone. But that was not necessarily there in all the drafts, and that to me was I really loved, and I can see how the book would have worked without it. I mean, I think that's the thing that's so interesting about this whole business is the book could have worked a dozen different ways, but I think that scene adds so much to the story. So I think it's lovely that now you're listening to your instincts about, well, there's something else. This isn't quite done yet. So that's super exciting. Tell our listeners where to find you. So you're new to your American audience. Tell us where to follow you on social media and your website and all the good things so they can find
Yeah.
Her Many Faces and potentially some of your other books as well.
Yeah. On Instagram, I'm Nicci Cloke, NICCICLOKE. And my website is niccicloke.com. I do have X, but I am really trying to move away from the toxicity of that particular platform. So I do have it, but I don't use it. So Instagram is probably the best place.
Yeah, I think it's Instagram is most of us are there. I hear you on I can barely keep track of my my dogs and myself, so I can't do too many social media things for sure. Instagram. Okay, Nicci Cloke, that's so fun. Well, everybody and go check out this beautiful cover they've done. Do you have a copy of the UK? You probably don't have it with you.
I don't have it with me, but it is very different.
I'll
It's
bet it is. I always
yeah.
find out, is the title the same?
The title is the same, but yeah, the cover is different. I love them both actually, but they're such different interpretations of it, which is interesting.
I think that's so fun. I this the book I have coming out has is its first it's my going to be my UK debut, and we're still deciding on the title because here it's called Pinky Swear, which is not
Ooh.
necessarily a thing in the UK, but we're
I feel
crossing
like
it.
we all know what it means. So yeah, I love that title.
Oh, thank you. I love it too.
Yeah.
So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today on Killer Women with Nicci Cloke and Her Many Faces. We will see you next time. Bye.
I